Stan has something that's characteristic of the people that sound like they've done something to tap zero-point energy. Has high frequency, high voltage, and there's a combination of the two at which something occurs. With Chernetsky in Russia, it was what he called a self-sustaining discharge. The tube would run by itself. When Stan gets this effect, the amount of hydrogen and oxygen that are emitted off these two electrodes is a step function. It almost boils the water. If I did this with standard electrochemicals, I need current, and the water should rise a degree every couple of seconds. With Stan's, it'll run for a half hour, and the water temperature hasn't changed. Something's different.
Meyer demonstrates this repeatedly without any difficulty, and yet on the face of it, it represents an extraordinary revolution. His measurements over the years suggest 1,700% greater efficiency than conventional electrolysis. And if he's to be believed, he's getting much better results from his latest, still secret invention.
Well, I first got involved with Stan Meyer when I went over there with a couple of colleagues to look at his water-splitting device. And so we arrived at Stanley Mayer. He had a demonstration cell. We filled it with tap water. In fact, I did that myself. And he switched it on, and almost instantly the three jaws dropped because of the rate at which the gas poured off. It was quite spectacular.
Whatever energy source Stan Meyer had tapped, it was not explicable by the electric power that was going into it. So something was powering it outside of conventional wisdom.
There is no question that the gas coming off in such abundance is hydrogen. Meyer ignites it to produce a high-temperature flame able to cut through metal.
Stanley Mayer has faced a lot of difficulties. He's 3 times tried to launch the device, produced press conferences, had the technical press round, but he's been almost universally slated. In the early days, very much so, they just ridiculed the whole idea. He's getting a little more notice now because some scientists are getting interested. But by and large, science is very intolerant, particularly modern science.
As with Tesla, Griggs and others, Meyer's claims are so far outside the received scientific wisdom that they've been ignored by the majority of the scientific establishment. But then, Meyer has ignored them too. He has poured his energies over the last 10 years into establishing recognition for his claims by getting international patents.
In the processing, there was a great deal of difficulty in trying to process the legal paperwork in such a way as to allow the patent office to fully understand what was actually occurring. In one instant, we brought the water fuel cell to Washington, D.C., and of course I had tweaked it in such a way to produce an enormous amount of hydrogen, oxygen, gas, and the patent examiner said, no, it will not work based on the electrolysis process. And when we turned it on and produced an enormous amount of hydrogen and gas, the examiner finally realized that we were doing exactly that, and went out in the hallway and started screaming and hollering to everybody on the floor, put out all your cigarettes, hydrogen's in the building. So we started laughing and said, well, we certainly convinced everybody in the patent office that we can do what we said we can do.
Even so, the US Patent Office dragged their feet for 3 years before granting patents on the hydrogen-producing device. Since then, against massive resistance, he's managed to get patents established throughout Europe and Japan. But the hydrogen machine was only the first step towards Meyer's ultimate dream. If he gets it right, this application of his technology would change the 21st century in the same way that the Wright brothers and Carl Benz transformed the 20th. He is currently modifying a beach buggy to run on nothing but water. It doesn't have a petrol tank or even a hydrogen container. It has just a tank of water. He's invented a device called a water splitter to replace the spark plug. As the water is injected into the engine, Meyer claims it's fractured into hydrogen and oxygen, then burned as fuel. Meyer is working on a kit to modify any engine. He hopes to demonstrate it on this car within 12 months.
And of course, the blessing to the use of the water as a fuel source, that on combustion, the byproduct is water mist. So we're even solving the environmental pollution problem at the same time that we're using water to maintain the industrial basis of the world.
But though the scientific establishment may have ignored the likes of Meyer, powerful military-industrial complex certainly hasn't. Over the past 10 years, Myers says he's been quietly approached by many influential organizations who would never admit publicly to their involvement with him.
It is involved in deep space exploration, and it's also being developed quite highly in the military. Basically what occurred with water fuel cell was in the fact that once they understood was actually occurring, then under the U.S. national security mandate, I have no decision of power of whether or not the military or NASA or the federal government will utilize the technology. They can utilize it in any way they so desire.
NASA is using every method it can to regain some of its now fading glory. In the face of strong congressional resistance, the days of limitless budgets for space exploration have long since gone. As the champion of a new, environmentally friendly energy source, NASA would gain immense support.
You have your identification?
As a former top scientist of the NASA Spaceplane project, Professor Paul Ziss has an inside track on the workings of the agency.
NASA has large centers. The center that's in charge of propulsion is NASA Lewis in Cleveland, Ohio. Can you imagine, instead of having a million-pound rocket has 900,000 pounds of fuel on board and oxidizing? Can you imagine what it would be like if you could put a device on there that would split water and run it into your engines? No explosive compounds.
Public confirmation of a contract from NASA would provide a resounding boost for Mars technology. Paul Ziss says it's only in a closed meeting they confirm such an agreement.
They're looking for new energy sources. I understand from the people that I've talked with that they have worked with Stan and tried to understand what he's done and given him a contract. I also understand with the bureaucracy in Washington and the congressional oversight as to why they would never admit it.
When new technology comes in existence, there's a great resistance to it because it can affect a lot of economic factors. In this particular case in the United States, we pay out roughly about $200 billion a year for foreign oil. It's quite obvious that the Arabs would pay $200 billion to try to keep this type of technology out of the economy. And many times over the last decade, I have been offered enormous amounts of money to simply sell out or to sit on it. The Arabs offered me well over $1 billion cold cash simply to sit on and do absolutely nothing with it. My life has been threatened many times. Of course, I happen to believe in the power of angels. And if I don't believe in the power of angels, I don't believe I'll be around here too long.
さて、原油の価格ずっと高い状態が続いていますが、鹿児島市のあるベンチャー企業がある車を開発しました。動力の鍵は水です。
この車、ガソリンは一切使いません。
こちら先ほど水道から汲んできた普通の水なんですけれども、この車水で走るということですので早速入れてみたいと思います。ご覧の通りエンジンは何事もなく快調に回っています。
排気ガスもほとんどがただの水蒸気。地球温暖化の原因となる二酸化炭素は全く含まれていません。水です。エンジンは市販の車を改造しました。まず送り込まれるのは水素です。点火して水素が燃えた直後、水を霧状に噴射します。水素が燃える熱で水は気化して水蒸気になり、爆発的に膨らみます。この力を動力として利用しようというのです。水素と水で走るという新しい発想。こうした車が車検証を受けたのは初めてのことです。早速一般の道路での試験走行が行われました。 会社側によりますと、満タンの水素タンクで走る距離は150キロ、スピードは時速180キロまで出ます。試験は2年間。国土交通省はこの間に得られたデータをもとに一般向けに量産化できるか検討することにしています。
環境にも優しい車でも水素って危なくないんですか？
気になりますよね。で、国土交通省